The Alien series is one of the most widely recognized and universally acclaimed IPs in all of movie history. That's one of the reasons why I haven't made a video about it up until now. So much of what I love about the series has already been said by other critics and fans, and I never want to make a video unless I think I'm bringing something new to the discourse, or expressing my thoughts in at least a slightly unique way. In the case of the Alien series, that means I can either break ground on some exciting new analysis, or make a 20-minute video about my undying love for the most loathed entry in the series. How loathed, you ask? Let's do a quick check of the discourse.
I hate this movie. I hate Alien Resurrection. This is an abomination. This film has barely a single redeeming quality in it.
Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic. I remember it so you don't have to. Yeah, how many of you knew that the geek god of sci-fi actually started off writing one of the dumbest sci-fi flicks ever to...
Before you think that that's why everything's so famously fucked up, I should point out that Whedon himself hated the way this movie was presented.
Its yellowish skin makes it look like it's made out of chicken korma. I don't ever recall seeing many people wanting to buy a statue or figure of this new monster. To be honest, I don't ever think I ever saw one on sale.
I remember I thought it's not a good idea to make sequels.
So we read their script and we thought, well, this is just going to ruin this franchise. This just doesn't work at all.
You didn't think I was going to bring up Alien Resurrection, but I am.
And when they called me, I thought it's finished. The series
It's really
finished
two
now.
people
Why you want to
doing
hire
everything
me?
wrong.
I am busy.
What this
I
film
don't
should
want to
be.
make
Deciding
a
to break off
Hollywood
the group to
movie.
walk alone down a dark
We tried to
corridor
stop
collecting
them.
guns,
Individuals,
despite
but
him
really
having
get
more
down
than
to
enough
it,
already.
it's
We didn't like
totally
it. They developed
Just
this
kill him already.
Did you really miss anything if this part of the story was cut out?
from an
Okay. Let's get one thing out of the way right up front. It's fine if you don't like Alien Resurrection. Really, your tastes are your tastes. Who am I to come along and say that your personal opinion is somehow wrong? You don't like the line readings? Fine. You think the sets are bad? Cool. You think the camera work is stupid and the basketball scene is dumb and you straight up pissed yourself when you saw that Ripley was born with a pre-applied manicure. All well and good. You're welcome to those opinions. But even as I spent years trying to decide whether or not the world needed to hear my particular take on this film, spoiler alert, it doesn't, I kept hearing the same complaints over and over, and they really started to gnaw at me. Something about the way that people critique this film. Most of its critics talk like its faults are self-evident, inarguable, a simple matter of fact. And then it finally dawned on me. These people are not critiquing the actual film. They're critiquing other people's tastes. Now at first this might seem like a purely academic distinction, but I'd argue that while one of these methodologies produces little more than fanficky clickbait, the other one stands a chance of producing actually better films. I know this isn't exactly the most pressing issue of our time, or even the most pressing issue in filmmaking, but I figure if anyone listening has even the slightest interest in actually creating films rather than just curating them, we're gonna have to expand the discourse. I'm not saying any of these other YouTubers are bad at what they do necessarily. In fact, there's probably a reason they all have more subscribers than me. And most of these videos are pretty tongue-in-cheek anyway, not serious attempts to critique the film. But they are the first results that pop up when you go looking for reviews online. Now, I still don't think anyone needs to hear my opinion of this film, but it finally got to a point where I thought that voicing my opinion was at least justified when I came across one particular interview in The Guardian with film critic David McEntee, who said,
See, I don't like that.
Part 1. The Pitch.
She'll breed. You'll die.
Let's start at the very beginning of this fracas. What did everyone want from a fourth Alien film? Well, some say the problem started with Alien 3, when it failed to include a $150 million firefight between 1,000 colonial marines and an army of angry xenomorphs. So when Alien Resurrection turned out to be yet another insular spaceship corridor speedrun set against a ticking clock, I'm sure plenty of fans were left scratching their heads. But I wasn't one of them. See, as much as I love the original trilogy, I always felt like it was missing an act. But not necessarily a big epic battle. No, I wanted something far more introspective from the series. I wanted to see Ripley self-actualize. I wanted to see her take what she'd learned while fighting the aliens and apply it to some other aspect of her life. I wanted Ripley to have an arc.
Was it everything you hoped for?
See, in the first Alien, Ripley's mostly just about survival. Then in Aliens, she's all about making sure everyone else survives. Then in Alien 3, she's all about making sure the alien dies. Not a whole lot for her to figure out about herself anywhere in there.
You've been in my life so long. I can't remember anything else.
Which is fine, these are still 3 of my all-time favorite films, but they left me wanting some iteration of Ripley blessed with the freedom of choice. And in Alien Resurrection, that's exactly what I got. Ripley starts off without any reason to care about anyone. Gone is the Ripley who cared so much about the survival of every last person within her purview.
Leave him.
It's a big change for her character, but honestly, why the hell not? Ripley gave her life for this dumbass species, and all they keep doing is negating her good work. Why shouldn't she cut loose and be a little self-interested for a change? Let everyone else keep up with her. But then, as the film progresses, we get to see Ripley decide what she's going to care about. What, if anything, is still worth saving. With the benefit of hindsight, we might take for granted the fact that Ripley's humanity ultimately wins out in the end. But when you really stop and think about it, there isn't a single human character in this entire film who doesn't have at least one hostile reaction toward Ripley. Most of them try to kill her at least once.
Well... You gonna kill me or what?
Contrast that with the aliens, who only ever attack her once. And yet Ripley ultimately rejects the warm embrace of the Kraysh for the unfamiliar ruin of that notorious shithole Earth.
Earth, man. What a shithole.
It's a recurring theme throughout screenwriter Joss Whedon's work, one that I happen to enjoy quite a bit. The notion that humans are basically complete shit, but we've got to try and save them anyway.
But there is grace in their failings. I think you missed that.
And Whedon isn't the only one who deserves the credit for this new iteration of Ripley. Aliens 3 and 4 are the only 2 films in the series where Sigourney Weaver received co-producer credits. And while I don't have a complete breakdown of every single creative decision she ever made, I get the distinct impression from the behind-the-scenes interviews that she was a big driving force in getting this particular vision of Ripley onto the screen.
They told me they were writing a new draft and that I'd be very, I would find it very provocative how I was brought back.
I wanted to make the character kind of strange and edgy, and I was afraid that Sigourney would say, can't we make her pretty and, you know, and likable, and can she have a puppy? And she just kept saying, push it further. What if I'm even stranger? What if I have more alien and less human in me? And she created an extraordinary character.
I can certainly understand why someone who loves aliens might hate Alien Resurrection. The themes of the one couldn't be more antithetical to the themes of the other. Aliens has been interpreted by many scholars and critics as something of an affirmation of the status quo, what with its central concern for the restoration of the nuclear family through the use of righteous violence.
Slap it in hard.
Right.
Are you ready to rock and roll?
And if you think that interpretation is a bit harsh, wait until you read the works of Amy Taubin, who suggests that the whole film acts as a kind of Reagan-era metaphor for lily-white wasps having to defend their children from parasitically fecund inner-city welfare queens. And here's the thing, it's film analysis. It's not that they're wrong so much as you either agree or disagree. Contrast that with Alien Resurrection, which is all about unnatural, created, dare I say, matriarchal families that exist outside any traditional Western patriarchal military chain of command. I'd like to be so bold as to suggest that a hatred of Alien Resurrection's pitch might simply be an answer to the question, do franchises have a right to question, or even undermine, their own themes?
Are we gonna sleep all the way home?
All the way home. You'll never get out of here alive. I don't care.
Part 2. The Execution. Alright, enough with the highfalutin themes and shit. I'm sure plenty of people love the themes of Alien Resurrection, and yet still hated the execution. Hell, even Whedon himself said in 2005 that his final script wasn't altered too much by the filmmakers, but that the line readings, the casting, the production design, the score, and almost every other element of the film was executed in such a ghastly fashion as to render it almost unwatchable.
It's the way you love me,
Oof. Okay, so what do I like so much about it? Let's take a look at the very first shot. Okay, seems pretty cool. Nice and moody. I like the low angle. But in fact, this is where a lot of the online conniptions start. See this? These guards are pointing their rifles right at each other's heads, with their fingers resting on the triggers. This is easily the worst gun handling I've ever seen in a mainstream Hollywood film. They're chewing bubblegum, for God's sake. But while some critics cite this as an example of the filmmakers having no clue what they're doing, I always assume the opposite. I always thought the filmmakers were establishing, right from the opening shot, just what kind of overfunded and underthought operation this is. Because stupid characters doesn't necessarily equal stupid writing.
Wanna check the chair?
In fact, the witlessness of the military leadership is so consistent throughout the film that I can't help but assume that it's a deliberate authorial characterization. Maybe even a statement on the military-industrial complex itself.
I'm not anxious to see her taking up her old hobbies. That won't happen. We won't tell her.
It's a queen. How did you know that?
I mean, it's not like this kind of cavalier weapons testing is without precedent, and yet almost every single online close reading of the film inevitably includes a meticulous cataloging of every single character's thoughtlessness, as if that somehow proves that the filmmakers themselves had no clue what they were doing.
2 days, bed and board. You know, Rach might want to snag a part here or there, whatever. I mean, if it's not imposing.
Mi casa es su casa.
But as for me, I like that the film seems to have something to say about the disregard for proper safety protocols in the face of new potential revenue streams. But when I hear critics going on and on about proper gun handling and stuff, it all starts to sound like they're less interested in the craft of screenwriting and more interested in showing off what they learned during the safety demo that one time they went to a gun range. A more general, but more mission-critical complaint I hear perhaps more than any other is that Alien Resurrection is just too weird.
Zooby, zooby, zoo. Zooby, zooby, zoo.
Too weird looking, too weird sounding.
Who do I have to fuck to get off this boat?
Really weird sense of humor.
Must be a chick thing.
And again, I'm not here to tell anyone that they need to appreciate the weirdness of this film if they don't already like it. My beef is more with the people who say that all the blame can be laid at the feet of whichever studio dingbat hired French surrealist Jean-Pierre Jeunet to direct. Amélie almost inevitably enters the discourse at this point. Oh, they hired the director of Amélie? Well, what did they expect? Well, no, they didn't hire the director of Amélie, because Amélie wouldn't exist for another 4 years. No, they hired the director of The City of Lost Children.
Les yeux ouverts! J'ai vu le monde! C'était un monde de chiens!
Which, I mean, even if you think this sort of aesthetic doesn't belong anywhere near the Alien franchise, I'm sure we can all agree that it's a much more fitting aesthetic than that of a whimsical romantic comedy that didn't actually exist in 1997. And it's not like the Alien franchise had never risked anything with its choice of director. With 2 feature films under his belt at the time of filming, Jeunet was actually the most experienced director to ever helm an Alien film. Ridley Scott had only directed The Duelists before Alien, James Cameron had only completed The Terminator before Aliens, and David Fincher had never directed a feature film before Alien 3, just commercials and music videos. I guess what I'm trying to say is, off-puttingly weird or not, the studio got exactly what it paid for when it hired Jeunet.
Who are you expecting? Santa Claus?
Ben oui, Miette. T'attendais le Père Noël?
Online critics will say things like, oh, if only they hadn't made such a dumb call with the director, this film might have actually been good.
Want another souvenir?
And I just find that kind of sentiment so corrupted by the surety of hindsight and the biases of personal taste that I worry we'll never get any bold directorial hires ever again if these guys, and it's almost always guys, keep leading the discourse. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention Weaver's role in choosing the director. She may or may not have had final approval, I'm not sure, but she certainly seemed jazzed about Jeunet's involvement while the film was in production.
They always pick a very good, brilliant, young director who takes the Alien elements and makes them his own.
I mean, I find it more than a little odd that all these internet fanboys would venerate Sigourney Weaver as like the undisputed queen of sci-fi cinema, which she is, make no mistake.
Get away from her, you bitch!
But only when she doesn't have any actual say in the production.
I mean, I have a very peculiar slant on what I think you need to direct these pictures, and I thought he'd be terrific.
Anyway, those are just two things I like about the film that so many others seem to hate. For posterity, I also think people tend to nitpick the plot in ways that make them sound like they just refuse to suspend their disbelief. Nobody seems to like the design of the alien newborn, and yet they can never seem to articulate why. And people tend to despise the hammy performances, even though the series was never quite devoid of sweet, delicious ham.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
And I know this is kind of an insipid way to confirm canon, but I did go ahead and buy the novelization in order to confirm that Ripley does not, in fact, fuck the Hive.
Clearly.
Anyway, the first couple of drafts of this video had me responding to a bunch of different complaints like these one by one. But not only did that make the video insufferably long, it also started to feel like I was undermining my own central claim. If all these online critiques really do just boil down to I didn't like it, then the only refutation needed from me is, well, I did. Part 3. The Legacy. So now, more than 2 decades after its release, what, if anything, are people still saying about Alien Resurrection? Well, for one thing, almost no one talks about it as a standalone film, only how it relates to the rest of the series. I think David McEntee represents the epitome of this tendency. He's the guy who said that Alien Resurrection doesn't work because it doesn't fit the Triple Goddess archetype. Now, to be clear, the Triple Goddess archetype is definitely a thing. Its roots can be traced back to antiquity. The Roman goddess Diana was often characterized as a triunity of huntress, moon, and underworld, although it's hard to find any artwork of her that includes any underworld imagery. Later, the moon itself came to represent the triple goddess with its 3 distinct phases. Over time, these mythic symbols were replaced by narrative archetypes meant to define, or at least label, women's roles in stories and folklore, with the most common codification being maiden, mother, crone, although some traditions prefer daughter, wife, mother, or daughter, wife, widow. Keen-eyed observers will note that these frameworks reduce women down to their mere reproductive relationships with men. Fast forward to 1996, and you get my all-time favorite rendition of the triple goddess archetype, codified so as to highlight the ways in which such rigid, gender-essentialist frameworks tend to restrict women's roles in stories and society.
There are only 3 ages for women in Hollywood: babe, district attorney, and driving Miss Daisy.
But reductive or not, do these frameworks apply to the Alien series? Well, sure. You can make that argument, no one's stopping you. You could certainly make the case that Alien presents Ripley as maiden, youthful, enthusiastic, driven, that Aliens presents her as mother, fertile, protective, stable, and that Alien 3 presents her as crone, wizened, weary, and wise. Plenty of scholars have also argued that Aliens presents its own self-contained triple goddess myth, with Newt as the maiden, Ripley as the mother, and the alien queen as the crone. But none of these films are any good because they conform to the triple goddess archetype. Otherwise, none of them would work as standalone films. It's not like the filmmakers ever even intended the series to fit the triple goddess archetype. Even David McEntee admits that much.
You're crazy.
This isn't so much an objective flaw with the series so much as it is a ruined term paper. Like, is this really what we're arguing? That one of the most enduring feminist icons in all of movie history only got that way by conforming to the 3 and only 3 archetypes that women are ever supposed to play?
I say we take off and nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure.
So what is the 4th archetype? What can Ripley be? How about self-actualizing badass? Now, there are those who say that bringing Ripley back at all was an objectively bad call no matter what you do with the character, because resurrecting Ripley after she died in Alien 3 was only ever going to seem forced and contrived. But honestly, bringing Ripley back from the dead never really bothered me, unplanned and studio mandated as it was, because Joss Whedon managed to do something with the script that not even the Bible gets right. When you bring a character back to life, you gotta make it cost something.
But the more I worked on it, the more the movie became about the idea of bringing somebody back from the dead. And as difficult as it was for me as a writer, it's 10 times more difficult for Ripley as a character.
I said earlier that this version of Ripley has been blessed with the freedom of choice, but that's only half true. Her newfound freedom comes at the cost of her decision to die in the previous film. She's been robbed of her bodily autonomy, her right to die, and her physical freedom. So sure, she gets to be a badass.
I thought you were dead.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
But only, paradoxically, at great cost. The new Ripley is no longer human. Her DNA has been mixed with that of the alien queen. She still has humanity, sure, but she's got to discover and define that humanity over the course of the film, and those efforts continually tax her. She's got to justify, first to herself and then to everyone else, why she should even be allowed to exist.
How can you stand being what you are?
Not much choice.
In hindsight, it only makes sense that she'd end up siding with all her fellow outcasts. The android kid that nobody respects or trusts, a room full of botched Ripley clones, and even the alien newborn, that half-human, half-alien hybrid that manages to rack up quite the body count on this, its first and only day of life, whom Ripley can't help but feel sorry for, seeing as how it's only as destructive as it is naive. It's got no place in this world. Same as her. The way I see it, this is very much a film for outsiders, for people who feel marginalized by society and the roles it tries to force upon them, who seek solace in trying to exist as liminal beings in a world full of rigid binaries and reductive categorizations. And wouldn't you know if the one positive comment I've ever heard Joss Whedon say about this film is that it maintained that core metaphor.
And ultimately it's a metaphor for everybody who feels like an outsider, but that was my first thought, that was what made it interesting.
If you're not interested in that, if you can't sympathize or identify with that kind of struggle, then yeah, I imagine your mileage with Alien Resurrection may vary. But as for me, Ellen Ripley is dead. Long live Ellen Ripley.
What happens now?
I don't know. I'm a stranger here myself.
Alien Resurrection gets the Corpse Reviver #2 award. Isn't that great? It's 1 part gin, 1 part orange liqueur, 1 part Lily Blanc, 1 part fresh squeezed lemon juice, shaken over ice and served in a chilled coupe with a wash of absinthe. Isn't that perfect? In fact, it's so perfect it sounds like I made it up for this video, but I promise it's a real thing.